Nicolas Cage. A hairdresser almost ruined Superman forever. In 1996, Warner Brothers was desperate to revive the Man of Steel after the catastrophic failure of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. They hired producer John Peters to shepherd the project. Peters had no background in comic books and no particular affection for Superman. What he did have was a bizarre obsession with giant spiders and ironclad confidence that he knew better than everyone else. When screenwriter Kevin Smith was brought in, Peters gave him three non-negotiable rules. First, Superman couldn't wear his traditional red and blue costume. Peters thought it made him look like an overgrown Boy Scout. Second, Superman couldn't fly. Peters found it boring. Third, and Smith has told this story so many times it's become Hollywood legend, the climax absolutely had to feature Superman fighting a giant spider. Smith thought he was joking. He asked why. Peters explained that spiders are the fiercest killers in the insect kingdom. Spiders aren't insects. The project was called Superman Lives, and somehow it got weirder. Tim Burton signed on to direct, bringing his gothic sensibility to a character defined by primary colors and Midwestern optimism. Burton's vision leaned into Superman's alienation, literally. This Clark Kent wouldn't discover his Kryptonian origins until well into adulthood. He'd be insecure, anxious, uncertain about his place in the world. Classic Burton territory. The misunderstood freak learning to embrace his freakishness. For the lead, Burton chose Nicolas Cage. On paper, it sounds insane. In practice, it might have been brilliant. Cage was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, but more importantly, he was a genuine comic book obsessive, a man who named his actual son Kal-El after Superman's Kryptonian birth name. He owned one of the most valuable comic collections in the world, including a copy of Action Comics #1 worth millions. He didn't just want to play Superman, he wanted to reinvent him. Costume tests were filmed. The footage that eventually leaked showed something alien. Cage in a metallic suit with long, flowing hair, looking less like a Kansas farm boy and more like a prog rock album cover come to life. Sets were under construction in Pittsburgh. Christopher Walken was cast as Brainiac. Chris Rock would play Jimmy Olsen. Sandra Bullock was the frontrunner for Lois Lane. The production had burned through $30 million before a single frame of actual movie was shot. Then Batman and Robin happened. Joel Schumacher's neon catastrophe hit theaters in 1998 and nearly killed the superhero genre overnight. Bat nipples, bat credit cards. Arnold Schwarzenegger making ice puns for 2 hours. Warner Brothers executives watched their Batman franchise implode and realized they were about to spend $200 million on an equally weird Superman movie starring the guy from Con Air. They pulled the plug 3 weeks before cameras rolled. Superman Lives became the most famous unmade film in Hollywood history. For decades, fans debated what could have been. Would Burton's dark vision have worked? Would Cage have redefined the character? Or would it have been an expensive disaster? We got a partial answer in 2023 when Cage finally appeared as Superman in The Flash, digitally de-aged and inserted into a multiverse sequence. His Superman fights, wait for it, a giant spider. Cage reportedly spent 3 hours on set. He was confused by the final product, noting he hadn't actually filmed himself fighting any spider. The CGI did all the work, but somewhere, presumably, John Peters smiled. The man really loved spiders. Tom Welling. Here's a number that should make your brain hurt. 217 episodes. Tom Welling played Clark Kent on Smallville for 10 seasons and 217 episodes. That's more screen time as Superman than every movie actor combined. Christopher Reeve did 4 films. Henry Cavill did 3. Brandon Routh got 1. Welling got a decade. He never once wore the Superman suit. That wasn't a budget issue or a rights problem. It was a deliberate creative choice that Welling felt so strongly about. He had it written into his contract before the pilot filmed. When creators Alfred Gough and Miles Miller pitched Smallville in 2001, they established what became known as the no tights, no flights rule. Their show was about a teenager figuring out who he was. They believed the drama ended the moment Clark put on the cape. Once you're Superman, what's left to struggle with? You can fly. You're invulnerable. You shoot lasers from your eyes. The interesting part isn't being Superman, it's becoming him. Welling agreed completely. He saw Clark Kent as the real character and Superman as almost an afterthought. Early in the first season, writers tried to sneak in a dream sequence where Clark would briefly appear in the costume. Welling's team called the studio and killed it immediately. The policy held for 10 years. 10 years of Clark Kent saving the world in flannel shirts and red jackets. 10 years of other characters flying while Clark remained grounded. Kara could fly. Bizarro could fly. General Zod and his entire army could fly. Clark Kent, the most powerful being on Earth, took the bus. The show became increasingly absurd about maintaining its restriction. By the later seasons, Clark was working at the Daily Planet, dating Lois Lane and fighting every major Superman villain: Doomsday, Brainiac, Darkseid, Lex Luthor. He'd essentially lived through Superman's entire comic book history without technically being Superman. Characters started calling him out within the show itself. Oliver Queen asked why he spent so much time moping on the farm. Lana Lang blamed herself for holding him back from his destiny. The series finale was supposed to finally deliver. Warner Brothers television president Peter Roth wanted Clark to suit up in the first act, fly around Metropolis, save Lois from a crashing plane, and give fans the triumphant Superman reveal they'd waited a decade to see. Welling personally called Roth and vetoed it. He argued the show was about the struggle, not the victory lap. Jumping straight into full Superman mode would betray everything they'd built. Showing Clark in the suit would feel like a different character entirely. The finale aired with the most teasing non-reveal in television history. Clark runs toward the camera. He rips open his shirt to show the S-shield underneath. Cut to a distant CGI figure flying through the sky. No clear shot of Welling in the costume ever appeared on screen. Fans were furious. They'd invested 10 years in this journey and didn't even get a proper destination. Welling defended the choice for years, insisting the ambiguity was intentional. Recently, though, something changed his mind. In an interview, Welling mentioned his sons have collected dozens of costumes over the years. One costume they don't have is Superman. When he asked why, his son explained the character was already taken by his father. Welling admitted that broke something open in him. He's now working on a Smallville animated revival with Michael Rosenbaum. Maybe, after all these years, fans will finally see Tom Welling as Superman. Or maybe he'll find another reason to stay in the flannel. Old habits die hard. Brandon Routh. Bryan Singer had a vision for Superman Returns. Make audiences feel like it was 1978 again. That was the problem. When Singer's film arrived in 2006, it positioned itself as a direct sequel to Richard Donner's original Superman films, pretending the disappointing third and fourth installments never happened. Singer wanted to recapture that era's magic. The John Williams score, the romantic sweep, the gentle earnestness of Christopher Reeve's performance. He wasn't reinventing Superman for a new generation. He was resurrecting a version that had been dead for 25 years. To pull this off, Singer needed an actor who could channel Reeve without becoming parody. He found Brandon Routh. Routh was cast specifically for his physical resemblance to Reeve. The height, the build, the jawline, even the slightly distant quality in his eyes. But resemblance wasn't enough. Singer wanted imitation. Routh was directed to study Reeve's vocal patterns, his body language, the way he distinguished bumbling Clark Kent from confident Superman. He wasn't playing his own interpretation. He was performing a tribute act. Critics noticed the effort. Newsweek praised how naturally Routh inhabited the iconic role. He won the Spike TV Award for Best Superhero, beating Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. The performance wasn't the problem. The problem was everything around it. Superman Returns is one of the strangest superhero movies ever made. It's melancholy to the point of depression. Superman spends most of the runtime pining for Lois Lane, who has moved on, gotten engaged to another man, and had a son. Rather than accepting this gracefully, Superman stalks her. There's a scene where he hovers outside her house using X-ray vision to watch her family eat dinner. It's supposed to be romantic. It plays as unsettling. More damningly, Superman never throws a single punch. Not one. In a 2.5-hour superhero movie, the hero's primary activity is lifting heavy objects and looking sad about it. He catches a plane. He stops a runaway car. He lifts a continent into space. At no point does he actually fight anyone. The climax involves him getting stabbed and beaten while barely resisting. Roger Ebert, while mostly positive about the film, observed that Routh seemed to lack the necessary charisma for the role. But how could he project charisma? The script gave him nothing to do except mope. Singer was so focused on recreating 1978 that he forgot audiences in 2006 might want something that felt current, vital, or, here's a wild idea, fun. The box office told the story. Superman Returns made $200 million domestically against a $270 million budget. The studio declared it a disappointment. Planned sequels were canceled. Routh, who had signed a multi-picture deal, never made another Superman movie. His career stalled badly. In interviews, Routh described retreating into World of Warcraft as a coping mechanism. The slow realization that his breakthrough role had become a dead end took years to process. Watching his Superman legacy evaporate in real time left real scars. Fun fact, Routh grew up in Norwalk, Iowa, about 100 miles from Woolstock, the birthplace of George Reeves, the original television Superman. The state apparently produces actors destined for complicated Superman legacies. The redemption came in 2019. The Arrowverse crossover crisis on Infinite Earths brought Routh back as an older Kingdom Come-inspired Superman. This time, nobody asked him to imitate Christopher Reeve. He got to play his own version. Fans responded warmly. It was the performance Routh had always been capable of giving, arriving 13 years too late. Superman Returns remains a cautionary tale about nostalgia as creative strategy. You can't resurrect the past. You can only remind people why they've moved on. Henry Cavill. The first time Henry Cavill screen tested for Superman, he lost the role to Brandon Routh. 7 years later, he got another chance. Zack Snyder was rebooting the franchise with Man of Steel, and Cavill was finally going to become the Man of Tomorrow. He had the physique. Ridiculous. The kind of body that looks digitally enhanced even when it isn't. He had the jawline. He had the fan credibility, having been a fantasy nerd long before it was culturally acceptable. On paper, the perfect Superman. Then people saw the movie. Man of Steel arrived in 2013 promising a Superman for the post-Dark Knight era. Christopher Nolan produced. The marketing emphasized gritty realism. Snyder delivered exactly that. A brooding, conflicted Kal-El, struggling to find his place in a world that might fear him. The color palette was desaturated to grimness. Joyful primary colors became steely grays. Then Superman snapped General Zod's neck, and the arguments began. The kill is presented as tragic necessity for asking what it would mean for a godlike alien to exist among humans. Cavill himself argued his Superman wasn't brooding. He was contemplative. The darkness was in the world around him, not in Clark himself. The journey was about becoming the symbol of hope, not starting as one. Critics countered that Superman doesn't need a journey to become hopeful. Hope is the point. That's his whole deal. Batman broods. Spider-Man quips through trauma. Superman inspires. That's the division of labor. Giving Superman the Batman treatment just makes him a less interesting Batman. Batman vs. Superman doubled down on everything controversial. Superman spent most of the film being distrusted and manipulated. He fought Batman in a rain-soaked nightmare sequence. He got impaled by Doomsday and died. The theatrical Justice League gave him minimal screen time and a digitally erased mustache. Cavill had been contractually obligated to keep facial hair for another film, and the CGI removal looked exactly as bad as you'd expect. Directors lined up to criticize the approach. Matthew Vaughn publicly stated Snyder had wasted Cavill's potential by making everything too dark. Fantasy author Brandon Sanderson argued the film failed because it abandoned Superman's essential optimism. Even David Corenswet, who plays Superman in James Gunn's reboot, acknowledged that while Snyder explored a previously unseen side of Superman on screen, his own version would deliberately go in the opposite direction. Cavill's tenure ended messily in 2023. He'd teased a comeback, appearing in a Black Adam post-credits scene that suggested more stories were coming, only for new DC leadership to move in a different direction entirely. After a decade of controversy, the most physically perfect Superman in history walked away without ever getting the hopeful, inspiring version fans wanted from the beginning. Was Snyder's vision brilliant deconstruction or fundamental misunderstanding? The debate continues years later. What's undeniable is that Cavill looked more like Superman than any actor who ever lived. He just never got to play the Superman most people actually wanted to see. Maybe that's the tragedy. Or maybe that's the point. Snyder would probably say it's both. Subscribe for more superhero history explained.